504, Chapters 6 and 7 of Treasure Island. Book talk starts at 13:35.
Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 504, Salty. This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by its listeners. Many thanks and much gratefulness to all of the listeners who have gone over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledged their support to the show. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Well, hello. How are you? I am well. I'm back from the beach. I took a vacation, an actual real vacation where I didn't do any work at all. I can't remember the last time that happened because I actually did do some work in Costa Rica. So that was fun. I'm about the tannest I've ever been, which is not very by normal mortal standards, but by my standards, it's quite dark. We had a great time, a lot of swimming, a lot of ice cream and frozen yogurt, and some tours of some very interesting places. The lighthouse at Cape May, New Jersey, turned out to be more interesting than I thought it would be. There are lots of both sad and odd stories that surround Cape May, like South Cape May entirely fell into the ocean. Why? Because I think it was during the war they had to build extended jetties a bit north of South Cape May, New Jersey. And the change in the sand distribution pattern caused by these long jetties redistributed the sand in such a way as to eliminate an entire city. It just fell into the ocean. There are really, really sad pictures of it falling into the ocean. If I can find one of them online, I will put it in the show notes at craftlit.com/504. Yeah, so South Beach or South Cape May, out on the beach, they used to have a giant plaster, I think, elephant, kind of like the Moulin Rouge elephant. I guess there's still one in Margate, New Jersey, the sister elephant. But this was used to sell real estate in South Cape May that then fell into the ocean. So, helpful tip, don't use giant plaster elephants to sell real estate, maybe? I don't know if that's a takeaway I was supposed to get, but it's one I got. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen my post about the condensed milk pot. Now, the tour guide didn't frame it this way, but to me, it just, with all of the things that we've learned on Craftlit, it seemed too obvious not to be one of these moments. If we think back way a long time ago, because I know this came up like a decade ago, once the rise of the middle class was really underway during the Victorian era, you started to see these upstarts being able to buy a silver tea service. And then they, of course, in order to keep up, had to buy a silver coffee service. And then people started inventing things like chocolate pots, because if you didn't stay one step ahead of the new money, how could you prove visually that you were old money? And the condensed milk pot just seemed to me to be one of those, wow, really? They had to invent that just to have another thing to buy and put on the table. Okay. They also had, and I didn't take a picture of this, they also had what looked like a really nice vase, but it wasn't just a vase. It was a celery service, vase-like structure. It was a glass, clear glass. Yeah, it looked like a vase with very straight sides going up maybe 6 or 7 inches. And you'd put a little water in the bottom, and then you would put your stalks of celery in that, because evidently celery was rather expensive. And so you'd want to display it on the table to, again, demonstrate how well you were doing or how old your money was. So I've included my Instagram photograph on the show notes for this episode, so you can get a look at that if you don't already follow me. It was an interesting estate, too, in part because there were a lot of things that we looked at that didn't get mentioned. There were sock blockers hung up in the scullery, which, of course, made me happy. And I do have a picture of those. That's also up on Instagram. There was also a gadget. I think I've seen these at antique stores before, but never knew what I was really looking at. It looked a little bit like an oversized meat grinder, but it wasn't. It was right next to the big cast iron stove that they cooked on, not one for heating it would have heated the house, but that wasn't its purpose. It was a cooking surface. Next to it was this odd contraption that I couldn't get a picture of that was a coal sifter. So you'd take all of the ashes out in the morning, stick them into the large, wide-mouthed opening, and turn a little crank, and it would sift out the still hot or just unburnt coals from the ashes so that you wouldn't waste any coal. I thought that was kind of interesting. Hadn't seen something like that. So this was the Emlen Physick estate in Cape May, New Jersey. It's big, it's beautiful. The guy who designed it, the architect who designed it, actually was one of the people who trained Frank Lloyd Wright. So if you've seen any Frank Lloyd Wright, the style of this particular architect, Mr. Furness, who I've linked out to in the show notes, his style is very similar, very linear, very clean. You could definitely tell in the house when renovations happened and his clean stuff had been replaced. But there was another thing that was really curious, and I also put this on Instagram. For the most prominent family's house estate of the time, there was a really interesting curiosity that one of the guys on the tour pointed out and asked about. And it was that when you walked in the door, there was this lovely gas-powered chandelier overhead. It was beautiful. It was also very odd because it had, I think, 6 different lights, arms that become lights. No longer gas-powered. Now it's electric. 3 of them, I believe, were not the same. It was like one of these things is not like the other. And these were test runs of new technology. So one arm would be replaced, or the end of one arm would be replaced by a new globe, a new way to diffuse and amplify and spread light. So instead of these kind of harsh lights where the light really stays by the ceiling and is pointing up, you could see that as people came up with new and inventive ways of improving that light, the family tested it out. And then another new one came along, and so they tested that one out. And there were several places in the house where you could see this having happened. Why they didn't replace all of the lights at some point with one of the newfangled contraptions that worked better, I don't know. They seem a little quirky, the Physicks who lived there. So, that was kind of fun. And it's not often that you get to see actual protected and renovated to match the time Victorian homes from this side of the pond. So that was kind of fun. And then my mom and I had a proper tea, which was also lovely. And in honor of Treasure Island, we also took a sunset dolphin watch cruise, all of us, and saw a dumpster load of dolphins having a ball playing in the wake of the boat coming up next to us. It was just lovely. And sunset, not a bad time to show up and sail around the edge of Cape May. The other interesting thing about Cape May, New Jersey is the Cape May diamonds. These are chunks of quartz that have been disturbed from their original location, which is about 200 miles upriver, up the Delaware River, up beyond where we are in New Hope. And they get dislodged and tumbled down through the Delaware River to the mouth of the Delaware River where it meets the Atlantic Ocean. Because of some oddities in what has happened in that area, some of these chunks of quartz get beaten severely, and it's like putting them through a rock polisher. And they then wash up on shore in various sizes and states of polishment. But the quartz is such clear, excellent quartz. It's a 7 on the 10 being diamond, very hard, can cut glass. On the hardness spectrum, these quartz crystals come in at a 7. So they're still pretty tough and they can still cut glass. And people do, in fact, cut them to look like diamonds. But instead of being, like $6,000 a carat, these are $750 a carat. That would be $7.50. And I mean, you really have to be an expert to look at these things when they're cut and not believe that they're diamonds. They're beautiful. But there's also a dumpster load of rose quartz, some of it more on the yellowish edge than the rose edge. And you can find all sorts of other things washing up on shore. Arrowheads, again, that have been beaten by the current. Fossils, I found a fossilized vertebra, and my mom found a geode that had been smashed on its way down. I found a shark's tooth, a baby shark's tooth, that it could be fossilized for all I can tell, but it is definitely a shark's tooth, and it's been worn down some. And part of the reason that these stones have been worn down the way they have been is because back in the 19-teens, there was a concrete ship. Yes, you heard me right. A concrete ship. It was big. And I think there were 12 or 14 of these things that were built. Oh, I'm sure someone listening knows why they were built. I found it so odd. Why would you build a ship out of concrete? But they did, and it floated, and it worked. And they were going to be used in World War I, and then not. And then a guy bought this and was going to turn it into a ferry back and forth between, I believe, New Jersey and Delaware. And there was a storm, and the ship broke loose from its moorings, and it ran aground at Sunset Beach, Cape May Point, and sunk. Broke in half and sunk. They've tried repairing it. They tried raising it. Nothing worked. Didn't matter, because once it sunk there, not only did it become a great habitat for marine life, it became a liquid crucible for these quartz stones that have been traveling for years down the Delaware River to the mouth of the Atlantic. And so that thing there is part of what has beaten these stones into submission and into really great beauty. And you can just go out every morning and go walking along the beach and just go diamond hunting. It's pretty cool, actually. I'm trying to find somebody who has a rock tumbler so that I can tumble some of the rocks that I collected, because some of them are very smoky when you find them, which honestly is also beautiful. But some of them are very smoky when you find them. Once you have tumbled them, they are stunningly clear, gorgeous things. So those are all my adventures from our travels at Cape May. It was a lot of fun, and even more so because my mom was with us. And so we had the boys and me and Andrew and my mom, and it was lovely. A very welcome break from all of the craziness at work. So, Treasure Island. Treasure Island, a lot happens in our chapters today, chapter 6 and 7. Not a lot that you need me for. There's not a whole lot in the way of odd language or anything like that. However, there is a reference to Squire Trelawney, who you meet in earnest today. Squire Trelawney breaks his long pipe on the grate. Now, I'm pretty sure that means that it was probably one of those long clay pipes. And when I went and looked for images of such things from circa 1750, I didn't find any clay ones, but I did find the image of a really extraordinary long pipe that was made of metal, and it was sectioned so that you could not screw, I think they're more like just joins that you tab A into slot B kind of thing. You just pop one piece into the next. 4 or 5 of these sections, maybe 4 or 5 inch sections of metal tube that end in the bowl of the pipe. Really amazing looking. I would be surprised if Squire Trelawney could have broken one of those. He certainly could have dislodged some of the joins, but My guess was that he was using one of those long clay pipes. They look the same as the one that I've linked out to on the show notes, but the ones that I'm thinking of anyway would have been white clay. There's also going to be a reference to latitude and longitude. And this was kind of curious because Robert Louis Stevenson, well, no, he didn't have to have known at this point. By the time he died, he would have known. But at this point in his life, he might have been paying attention to things like latitude and longitude. He lists this particular set of numbers as having been close to Caracas, Venezuela. So I knew that, and I knew the longitude and latitude that Stevenson had put in the book. So I just copy-pasted the latitude and longitude out of a full-text version of the book online and stuck that sucker into Google Maps. And I immediately wound up in the South Atlantic, pretty darn close to Antarctica. And I thought, well, that can't be right. So I changed the east to the west just to see, because there are no indications of north, south, east, or west on these particular numbers that Stevenson gave us. And it just moved me a little bit further in one direction or the other. I don't remember which one I changed first. So then I got smart and I went in and I found the latitude and longitude for Caracas. And I looked back at my original numbers and realized, oh, Stevenson reversed them. So it's longitude and latitude. Now, why did he do that? I have no idea, but he did. And as soon as I reversed the sets of numbers, there I was just off the coast, actually quite a ways off the coast of Venezuela, but up by the other islands that are prominent between Florida and the northern coast of South America. So what is there to see there? Not much. It's a place. You can follow the link I gave you. I'm not going to go visit anytime soon. You're welcome to. Send pictures. but it was nothing special. It's like finding a phone number in a book or in a song and typing it in and hoping that you're going to get an interesting message, and not. So I did that for you. You're welcome. There is one other thing that I thought was kind of interesting. We've talked before, I believe, about the fact that men who lived on the sea and worked on the sea all had to be pretty handy people. And one of the things they needed to know how to do rather well was sew. There's a thimble among the captain's effects that Jim and his mother went through when they were looking for his money, the captain's money. And today you will hear what else you could use a thimble for. And I thought it was genius. So that's something to listen for. Squire Trelawney's character. Oh, he's a fun one. And just at the end of chapter 6, Dr. Livesey, he has one of the best moments out of literature because it is a moment of absolute, total honesty where you're just like, no joke and no lie. Dude, I'm 100% with you. Yes. And he turns out in chapter 7 to have been pretty prescient in his statement. So you'll get to see some of that start to play out in today's chapters. And with that, I'm going to let you listen. Here we go with chapters 6, which is the end of part 1, and 7, which is the beginning of part 2 of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Here we go.
Chapter 6. The Captain's Papers. We rode hard all the way till we drew up before Dr. Livesey's door. The house was all dark to the front. Mr. Dance told me to jump down and knock, and Dogger gave me a stirrup to descend by. The door was opened almost at once by a maid. "Is Dr. Livesey in?" I asked. "No," she said. He had come home in the afternoon, but had gone up to the hall to dine and pass the evening with the squire. "So, there we go, boys," said Mr. Dance. This time, as the distance was short, I did not mount, but ran with Dogger's stirrup leather to the lodge gates, and up the long, leafless, moonlit avenue to where the white line of the hall buildings looked on either hand on great old gardens. There Mr. Dance dismounted, and taking me along with him was admitted at a word into the house. The servant led us down a matted passage and showed us at the end into a great library, all lined with bookcases and busts on top of them, where the squire and Dr. Livesey sat, pipe in hand, on either side of a bright fire. I had never seen the squire so near at hand. He was a tall man, over 6 feet high, and broad in proportion, and he had a bluff, rough and ready face, all roughened and redded and lined in his long travels. His eyebrows were very black, and moved readily, and this gave him a look of some temper, not bad, you would say, but quick and high. "Come in, Mr. Dance," said he, very stately and condescending. "Good evening, Dance," said the doctor with a nod, "and good evening to you, friend Jim. What good wind brings you here?" The supervisor stood up straight and stiff, and told his story like a lesson. But you should have seen how the two gentlemen leaned forward and looked at each other and forgot to smoke in their surprise and interest. When they heard how my mother went back to the inn, Dr. Livesey fair slapped his thigh, and the squire cried "Bravo!" and broke his long pipe against the grate. Long before it was done, Mr. Trelawney, that you will remember was the squire's name, had got up from his seat and was striding about the room, and the doctor, as if to hear the better, had taken off his powdered wig and sat there looking very strange indeed with his own close-cropped black poll. At last Mr. Dance finished the story. "Mr. Dance," said the squire, "you are a very noble fellow, and as for riding down that black atrocious miscreant, I regard it as an act of virtue, sir, like stamping on a cockroach. This lad Hawkins is a trump, I perceive. Hawkins, will you ring that bell? Mr. Dance must have some ale." "And so, Jim," said the doctor, "you have the thing that they were after, have you?" "Here it is, sir," said I, and gave him the oilskin packet. The doctor looked it all over, as if his fingers were itching to open it, but instead of doing that he put it quietly in the pocket of his coat. "Squire," said he, "when Dance has had his ale he must of course be off on his Majesty's service, but I mean to keep Jim Hawkins here to sleep at my house, and, with your permission, I propose we should have up the cold pie and let him sup." "As you will, Livesey," said the squire. "Hawkins has earned better than cold pie." So a big pigeon pie was brought in and put on a side table, and I made a hearty supper, for I was as hungry as a hawk, while Mr. Dance was further complimented and at last dismissed. "And now, squire," said the doctor. "And now, Livesey," said the squire in the same breath. "One at a time, one at a time," laughed Dr. Livesey. "You have heard of this Flint, I suppose?" "Heard of him?" cried the squire. "Heard of him, you say? He was the bloodthirstiest buccaneer that sailed. Blackbeard was a child to Flint. The Spaniards were so prodigiously afraid of him that, I tell you, sir, I was sometimes proud that he was an Englishman. I have seen his topsails with these eyes off Trinidad, and the cowardly son of a rum puncheon that I sailed with put back, sir, into the port of Spain." "Well, I've heard of him myself in England," said the doctor, "but the point is, had he money?" "Money?" cried the squire. "Have you heard the story? What were these villains after but money? What do they care for but money? For what would they risk their rascal carcasses but money?" "That we shall soon know," replied the doctor. "But you are so confoundedly hot-headed and exclamatory that I cannot get a word in. What I want to know is this. Suppose that I have here in my pocket some clue to where Flint buried his treasure. Will that treasure amount to much?" "Amount, sir?" cried the squire. "It will amount to this. If we have the clue you talk about, I'll fit out a ship in Bristol Dock and take you and Hawkins here along, and we'll have that treasure if I search for a year." "Very well," said the doctor. "Now then, if Jim is agreeable, we'll open the packet." And he laid it before him on the table. The bundle was sewn together, and the doctor had to get out his instrument case and cut the stitches with his medical scissors. It contained two things, a book and a sealed paper. "First of all we'll try the book," observed the doctor. The squire and I were both peering over his shoulder as he opened it, for Dr. Livesey had kindly motioned to me to come round from the side table where I had been eating to enjoy the sport of the search. On the first page there were only some scraps of writing, such as a man with a pen in his hand might make for idleness or practice. One was the same as the tattoo mark, "Billy Bones his fancy." Then there was "Mr. W. Bones, mate," "No more rum," "Off Palm Key he got it," and some other snatches, most single words and unintelligible. But I could not help wondering who it was that had got it, and what it was he got. A knife in his back, as likely as not. "Not much instruction there," said Dr. Livesey as he passed on. The next 10 or 12 pages were filled with a curious series of entries. There was a date at one end of the line, and at the other end a sum of money, as in common account books, but instead of explanatory writing, only a varying number of crosses between the two. On the 12th of June, 1745, for instance, a sum of £70 had plainly become due to someone, and there was nothing but 6 crosses to explain the cause. In a few cases, to be sure, the name of a place would be added, as of "off Caracas," or a mere entry of latitude or longitude, as 62 degrees 17 minutes 20 seconds, 19 degrees 2 minutes 40 seconds. The record lasted over nearly 20 years, the amount of the separate entries growing larger as time went on, and at the end a grand total had been made out, after 5 or 6 wrong additions, and these words appended: "Bones, his pile." "I can't make head or tail of this," said Dr. Livesey. "The thing is as clear as noonday," cried the squire. "This is the Black-hearted Hound's account book. These crosses stand for the names of ships or towns that they sank or plundered. The sums are the scoundrel's share, and where he filled an ambiguity, you see he added something clearer. Off Caracas, now, you see, here was some unhappy vessel boarded off that coast. God help the poor souls that man her, coral long ago." "Right," said the doctor. "See what it is to be a traveller. Right. And the amounts increase, you see, as he rose in rank." There was little else in the volume but a few bearings of places noted in the blank leaves towards the end, and a table for reducing French, English and Spanish moneys to a common value. "Thrifty man," cried the doctor. "He wasn't the one to be cheated." "And now," said the squire, "for the other." The paper had been sealed in several places with a thimble by way of seal, the very thimble, perhaps, that I had found in the captain's pocket. The doctor opened the seals with great care, and there fell out the map of an island, with latitude and longitude, soundings, names of hills and bays and inlets, and every particular that would be needed to bring a ship to a safe anchorage upon its shores. It was about 9 miles long and 5 across, shaped, you might say, like a fat dragon standing up, and had 2 fine landlocked harbours and a hill in the centre part, marked the Spyglass. There were several editions of a later date, but above all 3 crosses of red ink, 2 on the north part of the island, 1 in the southwest, and besides this last, in the same red ink, and in a small neat hand, very different from the captain's tottery characters, these words: "Bulk of treasure here." Over the back the same hand had written this further information: "Tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point to the north of nor'-nor'-east, Skeleton Island, south-south-east by east, 10 feet. The bar silver is in the north cache. You can find it by the trend of the east hummock, 10 fathoms south of the black crag with the face on it. The arms are easy found in the sandhill north point of North Inlet, Cape, bearing east and a quarter north. J.F." That was all. But brief as it was, and to me incomprehensible, it filled the squire and Dr. Livesey with delight. "Livesey," said the squire, "you will give up this wretched practice at once. Tomorrow I start for Bristol. In 3 weeks' time, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 10 days, we'll have the best ship, sir, and the choicest crew in England. Hawkins shall come as cabin boy. You'll make a famous cabin boy, Hawkins. You, Livesey, are ship's doctor. I am admiral. We'll take Redruth, Joyce and Hunter. We'll have favourable winds, a quick passage, and not the least difficulty in finding the spot, and money to eat, to roll in, to play duck and drake with ever after." "Trelawney," said the doctor, "I'll go with you, and I'll go bail for it, so with Jim, and be a credit to the undertaking. There's only one man I'm afraid of." "And who's that?" cried the squire. "Name the dog, sir." "You," replied the doctor, "for you cannot hold your tongue. We are not the only men who know of this paper. These fellows who attacked the inn tonight, bold, desperate blades to be sure, and the rest who stayed aboard that lugger, and more, I dare say, not far off, are, one and all, through thick and thin, bound that they will get that money. We must none of us go alone till we get to sea. Jim and I shall stick together in the meantime, and you'll take Joyce and Hunter when you ride to Bristol, and from first to last not one of us must breathe a word of what we've found." "Livesey," returned the squire, "you are always in the right of it. I'll be silent as the grave." End of Chapter 6. Part 2. The Sea Cook. Chapter 7. I go to Bristol. It was longer than the squire imagined ere we were ready for the sea, and none of our first plans, not even Dr. Livesey's, of keeping me beside him, could be carried out as we intended. The doctor had to go to London for a physician to take charge of his practice. The squire was hard at work at Bristol, and I lived on at the Hall under the charge of old Redruth, the gamekeeper, almost a prisoner, but full of sea dreams and the most charming anticipations of strange islands and adventures. I brooded by the hour together over the map, all the details of which I well remembered. Sitting by the fire in the housekeeper's room, I approached that island in my fancy from every possible direction. I explored every acre of its surface. I climbed 1,000 times to that tall hill they called the Spyglass, and from the top enjoyed the most wonderful and changing prospects. Sometimes the isle was thick with savages with whom we fought, sometimes full of dangerous animals that hunted us, but in all my fancies nothing occurred to me so strange and tragic as our actual adventures. So the weeks passed on till one fine day there came a letter addressed to Dr. Livesey, with this addition: to be opened in the case of his absence by Tom Redruth or young Hawkins. Obeying this order we found, or rather I found, for the gamekeeper was a poor hand at reading anything but print, the following important news: Old Anchor Inn, Bristol, March 1, 17... Dear Livesey, As I do not know whether you are at the Hall or still in London, I send this in double to both places. The ship is bought and fitted. She lies at anchor, ready for sea. You never imagined a sweeter schooner. A child might sail her. 200 tons. Name Hispaniola. I got her through my friend Blandley, who has proved himself throughout the most surprising trump. The admirable fellow literally slaved in my interest, and so, I may say, did everyone in Bristol as soon as they got wind of the port we sailed for. Treasure, I mean." "Redruth," said I, interrupting the letter. "Dr. Livesey will not like that. The squire has been talking after all." "Well, who's the better right?" growled the gamekeeper. "A pretty rum go if squire ain't to talk for Dr. Livesey, I should think." At that I gave up all attempt at commentary and read straight on. "Blandley himself found the Hispaniola, and by the most admirable management got her for the merest trifle. There is a class of men in Bristol monstrously prejudiced against Blandley. They go the length of declaring that this honest creature would do anything for money, that the Hispaniola belonged to him, and that he sold it to me absurdly high. The most transparent calumnies. None of them dare, however, to deny the merits of the ship. So far there was not a hitch. The workpeople, to be sure, riggers and what not, were most annoyingly slow, but time cured that. It was the crew that troubled me. I wished to round up a score of men, in case of navies, buccaneers, or the odious French, and I had the worry of the deuce itself to find so much as half a dozen, till the most remarkable stroke of fortune brought me the very man that I required. I was standing on the dock when, by the merest accident, I fell into talk with him. I found he was an old sailor, kept a public house, knew all the seafaring men in Bristol, had lost his health ashore, and wanted a good berth as cook to get to sea again. He had hobbled down there that morning, he said, to get a smell of the salt. I was monstrously touched, so would you have been, and out of pure pity I engaged him on the spot to be ship's cook. Long John Silver he is called, and has lost a leg, but that I regarded as a recommendation, since he lost it in his country's service under the immortal Hawke. He has no pension, Livesey. Imagine the abominable age we live in. Well, sir, I thought I had only found a cook, but it was a crew I had discovered. Between Silver and myself we got together in a few days a company of the toughest old salts imaginable, not pretty to look at, but fellows, by their faces, of the most indomitable spirit. I declare we could fight a frigate. Long John even got rid of 2 out of the 6 or 7 I had already engaged. He showed me in a moment that they were of just the sort of freshwater swabs we had to fear in an adventure of importance. I am in the most magnificent health and spirits, eating like a bull, sleeping like a tree, yet I shall not enjoy a moment till I hear my old tarpaulins tramping around the capstan. Seaward ho! Hang the treasure! It's the glory of the sea that has turned my head. So now, Livesey, come post. Do not lose an hour, if you respect me. Let young Hawkins go at once to see his mother with Redruth for a guard, and then both come full speed to Bristol. John Trelawney. P.S. I did not tell you that Blandley, who, by the way, is to send a consort after us if we don't turn up by the end of August, had found an admirable fellow for sailing master, a stiff man, which I regret, but in all other respects a treasure. Long John Silver unearthed a very competent man for a mate, a man called Arrow. I have a boatswain who pipes, Livesey, so things shall go man-of-war fashion on board the good ship Hispaniola. I forgot to tell you that Silver is a man of substance. I know of my own knowledge that he has a banker's account which has never been overdrawn. He leaves his wife to manage the inn, and as she is a woman of colour, a pair of old bachelors like you and I may be excused for guessing that it is the wife, quite as much as the health, that sends him back to roving. J.T. P.P.S. Hawkins may stay 1 night with his mother. J.T. You can fancy the excitement into which that letter put me. I was half beside myself with glee, and if ever I despised a man, it was old Tom Redruth, who could do nothing but grumble and lament. Any of the under gamekeepers would gladly have changed places with him, but such was not the squire's pleasure, and the squire's pleasure was like law among them all. Nobody but old Redruth would have dared so much as even to grumble. The next morning he and I set out on foot for the Admiral Benbow, and there I found my mother in good health and spirits. The captain, who had so long been the cause of so much discomfort, was gone where the wicked cease from troubling. The squire had had everything repaired and the public rooms and the sign repainted, and had added some furniture. Above all, a beautiful armchair for my mother in the bar. He had found her a boy as an apprentice also, so that she should not want help when I was gone. It was on seeing that boy that I understood for the first time my situation. I had thought up to that moment of the adventures before me, not at all of the home that I was leaving, and now at sight of this clumsy stranger who was to stay here in my place beside my mother, I had my first attack of tears. I am afraid I led that boy a dog's life, for he was new to the work. I had 100 opportunities for setting him right and putting him down, and I was not slow to profit by them. The night passed, and the next day after dinner Redruth and I were afoot again and on the road. I said goodbye to my mother and the cove where I had lived since I was born, and the dear old Admiral Benbow, since he was repainted, not longer quite so dear. One of my thoughts was of the captain, who had so often strode along the beach with his cocked hat, his sabre-cut cheek, and his old brass telescope. Next moment we had turned the corner, and my home was out of sight. The mail picked us up about dusk at the Royal George on the heath. I was wedged in between Redruth and a stout old gentleman, and in spite of the swift motion and the cold night air, I must have dozed a great deal from the very first, and then slept like a log, up hill and down dale, through stage after stage. But when I was awakened at last, it was by a punch in the ribs, and I opened my eyes to find that we were standing still before a large building in a city street, and that the day had already broken a long time. "Where are we?" I asked. "Bristol," said Tom. "Get down." Mr. Trelawney had taken up his residence at an inn far down the docks to superintend the work upon the schooner. Thither we had now to walk, and our way, to my great delight, lay upon the quays and besides the great multitude of ships of all sizes and rigs and nations. In one, sailors were singing at their work. In another there were men aloft, high over my head, hanging to threads that seemed no thicker than a spider's. Though I had lived by the shore all my life, I seemed never to have been near the sea till then. The smell of tar and salt was something new. I saw the most wonderful figureheads that had all been far over the ocean. I saw besides many old sailors with rings in their ears and whiskers curled in ringlets and tarry pigtails and their swaggering clumsy sea walk. And if I had seen as many kings or archbishops, I could not have been more delighted. And I was going to sea myself, to sea in a schooner, and a piping boatswain, and pig-tailed singing seamen, to sea, bound for an unknown island, and to seek for buried treasure. While I was still in this delightful dream, we came suddenly in front of a large inn, and met Squire Trelawney, all dressed out like a sea officer, in stout blue cloth, coming out of the door with a smile on his face and a capital imitation of a sailor's walk. "Here you are!" he cried. "And the doctor came last night from London. Bravo! The ship's company complete." "Oh, sir," cried I, "when do we sail?" "Sail?" says he. "We sail tomorrow."
Woohoo! We sail tomorrow. We sail tomorrow. But if you're not nervous, you weren't listening. Because, oh my gosh, Squire Trelawney is such a putz. I said to Andrew the other day, I think the Yiddish word putz was created to describe Squire Trelawney. There is no better explanation. He is an absolute and utter putz. Oh Oh my gosh. First, end of chapter 6. Don't worry, I will be silent as the grave. Within how many seconds were you learning that he basically told anyone who would listen that they were sailing to find treasure? How? Oh, I don't understand how you can be. Is it stupid? Gullible? Is it just a belief in your infallibility because you're the squire? I mean, certainly his servants seem to be of that mind. Like, well, if the squire says it, he's a squire, so cool. Let him do what he's going to do. I was pretty nervous by the end of chapter 7. I was well on my way to nervous at the beginning of chapter 7, as soon as they start reading the letter. So Jim learns that they have a ship, the Hispaniola, which everybody says is a marvelous ship. And that actually sounds like it might be true. Very possibly. And we know that this guy Blandly managed to get a really good deal for the squire. But by the end of the chapter, we know that everybody else is saying that Blandly was in fact the owner, and it was like highway robbery. He just took the squire for a dumpster load of money. So that's, shame on him. That's Squire Trelawney's problem. Everybody else's problem seems like it might be the crew. Now, Jim hasn't had a reaction to the description of Long John Silver. Because we are living when we are, and we know what we know, as soon as he shows up, our alarm bells start ringing, right? Because I don't know how old people are when they first hear Long John Silver / pirate in the same sentence, but it feels like I've always known that Long John Silver was a pirate. I could be unique in that. I don't know. But, uh-oh. Now, Trelawney says that he has engaged Long John Silver as the cook out of pure pity. Well, that's a lousy reason to hire somebody to be a cook on a ship, but okay, fine. He sounds like a lovely guy. He kept a public house, so he knows his way around serving beer and cider, and probably also food, so that's great. I don't know if we can believe that Long John Silver lost his leg on land in the service of king and country, and with no pension. The nerve. Gee, I can think of a really good reason why he might not have a pension from serving the country. Trelawney, putz, and gullible. Then Long John Silver gets rid of a couple of sailors that Trelawney has already hired and says, he'll round out the crew for Trelawney because he's such a nice guy. He's such a big help, which I wonder about myself. But perhaps the smartest thing that Trelawney does is he makes an arrangement, and it goes by really fast. He makes an arrangement to have Blandly send another ship after them if they don't return by the end of August. Now, I think it's March right now. So if they head out and nobody hears from them by August, help will be sent. Well, that also means that the information on where to send them to had to have been transmitted. Trelawney. So yeah, smart to have backup come in case you need it. Not so smart if you had to share the coordinates. Now, another thing that goes by kind of quickly is that Blandly found, and this is a quote, an admirable fellow for a sailing master. Sailing master meaning captain of the ship. Now, Trelawney says he's a stiff man, which I regret, but in all other respects, a treasure. Okay, so me personally, I want a stiff man as the captain. I don't want somebody I feel like I can go have a beer with. I want somebody who's going to steer the ship and steer it right and keep the clocks running and the sails up and take them down when they need to. And I don't want to have to worry about that. Somebody's going like, no, you know what, guys, you look tired. Don't worry about it. Just peg the wheel so that it doesn't turn and go take a nap. It's good. It's like, no, you want the stiff guy, not Trelawney. Trelawney does not. Oh, Trelawney. Now, how Trelawney knows that Long John Silver is a man of substance and has a banker's account which has never been overdrawn, I'm going to assume Long John Silver said that and Trelawney's believing it. Now, he's leaving behind a public house, right? Because that's what his living has been. And here's where something interesting happens. And I've been looking around online, and I don't have anything to go on except what we know of Robert Louis Stevenson and Squire Trelawney right now. The line at the end of Trelawney's letter is that Silver leaves his wife to manage the inn. And as she is a woman of color, a pair of old bachelors like you and I may be excused for guessing that it is the wife quite as much as the health that sends him back to roving. Okay, there are so many layers of ick going on in that. First off, there's the wife is being left to manage the public house all by herself. So clearly a competent woman. So there's that. But then you get Trelawney saying that he and Dr. Livesey, being old bachelors, can/should assume that one of the reasons that Silver wants to go out and about again on board a ship is to get away from his wife. So that's charming. And I'm sure it is very possible that Silver could have played up that angle knowing that Squire Trelawney was a dork. So fine. But then he ties in the fact that as she is a woman of color, which to our ears should be horrifying, that it's brought up in this otherwise longer pejorative commentary on the wife and/or/women, but it's that as she is a woman of color, not just a woman, not just, and we don't know what he means by a woman of color, Islander, North African, South Islander. We have no idea where he's drawing this from. She could just be tan. We have no clue. But we do know that there's been, since Wide Sargasso Sea, and even before that, a lot of awareness that the books that we have been reading, a lot of them on Craftlit, the families that are doing well in the 17 and 1800s, especially in England, that a lot of that money came from exploitation incomes or exploitative incomes. People had plantations in the West Indies. People were involved in slavery. We know that Charles Dickens dealt with some of that in Bleak House. There is a whole mess load of stuff going on at this time. So, first off, could Long John Silver have been married to a woman of a darker hue who came from an island or an island nation? Heck yes, absolutely. If he's leaving her to manage the inn, does that indicate to us that Stevenson is being obtuse/racist, or that it's Trelawney that's being obtuse/racist? I'm going with Trelawney, that this is a very subtle way that probably wouldn't have stood out that much to people at the time, but it is a subtle way for us to be getting more information on Trelawney. And the reason that I say that is because at this time when Stevenson is writing the book, he hasn't traveled south yet, but he will, in not too long, go to Samoa in the South Pacific, and that is where he will spend the rest of his life, and that is where he will die. And when he dies there, his relationship with the native population on Samoa was so awesome that it was like a national day of mourning when he died. He was clearly beloved, and he clearly loved the people that he'd been living among in Samoa. My thinking is along the lines of, if you had a problem with believing that someone from a different country with a different nationality who looks different than you is therefore de facto inferior, you probably wouldn't have gone there in the first place to live. I mean, he went to stay, trying to find a climate where he could be healthy, obviously, but also dude stayed. So there's that. Oh, and there's something I missed from last week. Oilskin. I looked up a bunch of stuff on Oilskin because of the way that the captain had protected his letters and papers. It was an oilskin pouch that was sewn together. And I started down that rabbit hole, and it was really actually kind of interesting. The process of making oilskin was to take fabric, put it on a frame, and then treat it with boiled linseed oil. And it wasn't just boiled linseed oil, it was boiled with things, many of them toxic, and lead, stuff like that, manganese. There are several other different recipes that I came across. But you'd boil this for a really long time and then paint it / pour it, depending on where you were in the process, onto this fabric, letting it dry absolutely thoroughly, and then reapplying several times. It was quite a process. And at the end, you got a really flexible, really, really water-resistant fabric. Now, one of the problems is if you sew it together, you wind up compromising that watertightness of the thing. This is why those coats that were oilskin coats often could be found with a kind of a cape that was all one piece of fabric, or at least had seams in different places than the undercoat did. You can see why. The water might drip through in one set of seams, but wouldn't then immediately drip through the other set of seams. And that would really actually keep you quite dry. This stuff was amazing. I've got linked out to a slightly obsessive blog post on oilcloth and canvas, and also put up a picture so that you could see what oilcloth looks like up close and personal. The reason that I went down the rabbit hole in the first place was because the description of Squire Trelawney opening the packet that Billy Bones had left behind struck me as interesting, because the packet had been sewn together, so it wasn't something that he opened very often. But it was oilcloth. It had been sewn together, and oilcloth is tacky enough at one point in its making that you could literally press two pieces of the oilcloth together and they'd stick and stay that way. I mean, you wouldn't want to apply a great deal of force, but it was certainly strong enough to be able to wrap your papers in and kind of stick the ends, like the press and seal saran wrap stuff that you can get nowadays. Kind of the same idea. But no, Billy Bones sewed this sucker shut. And there's a description of how difficult it is for Squire Trelawney to cut, that he has to get out his actual surgical tools in order to cut the seams where the packet was sewn. My guess is that the thread had been treated, but even more, that there had been wax dripped along the seam as well. So it probably really was quite difficult to get into this in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it wasn't just something that you would casually open on a day. So I just wanted to share that with you. I thought that was kind of cool. Jim then gets to go and see his mother before he heads out to sea. He's got kind of an interesting reaction. It's almost self-reflective, but not entirely, about how he felt seeing the young kid who'd taken over his place, working there with his mother, and not really being so self-reflective about the fact that he was kind of a jerk to this kid, but at least noting the fact that he had been a jerk to this kid, and that it was kind of hard to see this happening, somebody taking his place. But there it is. I also thought it was kind of lovely that when Jim sleeps on the mail carriage, they take the overnight carriage to Bristol. When he wakes up and gets out of the coach, Jim said, "Though I had lived by the shore all my life, I seemed never to have been near the sea till then." I thought that was kind of interesting, that where the Admiral Benbow seems very sleepy and quiet, not a lot going on in whatever would have passed for a wharf. But here in Bristol, evidently it feels like he's finally arrived in a place that exhibits and embodies what he thought of when he thought of seafaring and all these sailors and figureheads on the boats. And yeah, it really had to be a pretty big deal for a kid who'd been raised in a cove at the Admiral Benbow. So Trelawney shows up all in sharp, stout blue cloth, looking like a sea officer, because if your costume's not good, oh my gosh. Oh, Trelawney. All right, so they sail tomorrow, which means for us, next week. You have a great week. I will attempt to endeavor to do so as well, and I will talk to you later. If you feel like calling and sharing your thoughts or opinions about Treasure Island or anything else having to do with Craftlit, please feel free to call area code 206-350-1642 and leave us a message. And that's it. Have a great one. I'll talk to you later. Bye. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review at iTunes or like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter or any one of a million different places that Craftlit wound up over the last 13 years. For more information on Craftlit, you can visit craftlit.com and subscribe via your favorite podcast app or download the Craftlit app so you can get all of your episodes right there in your hand, all in one place without having to hassle with anything else. So you can be sure not to miss any of Treasure Island. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on. Thanks.